Hi gang, this is Rob at the Edge Power Sports with the dirt bike community. We're going to talk a little bit about some questions people had about supermoto riding posture. So a lot of it is actually pretty similar to dirt riding, a lot of counterweighting posture. We're going to kind of go over it. We'll kind of start from front to back, talk about our start procedure first. Typically when you're starting at the start grid line, you want to be as far forward up on that bike as you can, because that's going to help keep the front brake weight or the front tire weighted down. If you don't have a whole shot device, or maybe you don't have any electronics, that's going to really help out as well, just keeping that front end loaded down as much as you can while you're doing that start. The other trick you can do is our bikes have to get to second gear right when we take off. So if we look down at my foot, as I come off of the launch, right when my foot's coming up, I'm catching that second gear as I'm going along. I'm not trying to reset and get my foot up underneath there. These are all gonna help you out on that quick reaction right after you start. So right as that foot comes up, some people start out on one foot, some people start out on two. I typically start out on two just from my drag racing career. Helps me keep a little more straight and balanced. If you're okay with starting out on one foot, that's totally fine. But as soon as that foot comes up, you can start reaching for that second gear and just post yourself up into it, and then you're already clicked into it. Then once you've got that second gear, then you can start rapidly going through with your foot on your peg, okay? So the other thing I would recommend, there's actually a song called the slow hand. Slow hand on your clutch. You don't want to be too rapid on it to where it's gonna pop that front end up. So working on that smooth, slow, consistent application as you're launching off is what's going to give you a good controlled start as well. It'll keep you from wheeling up out of the situation. And a lot of times, this 2007 DRZ, I've beaten the crap out of brand new 450s out there. So I usually get the whole shot on the start. So getting a really good process on that slow hand clutch, catching that second gear upshift as you're lifting that foot up off the ground, okay? The other thing, now this is where it gets a little complicated. There's no real bad way to ride supermoto. Some people prefer more road racing posture where their head's down, their knees out. A lot of my career from riding is from road racing, so it's kind of naturally ingrained with me to get that knee down and get that elbow out. Then there's also more the standard setup of supermoto riding where you're more counterweighting. So as you're leaning the bike in, you're sitting more up straight, and that's very, very typical of dirt riding. One reason we actually get our foot up and out, it's not to really weight the front end, it's just to get our foot up out of the way. So you don't necessarily have to get your foot way out there like that. Even as you're counterweighting and going into those turns, you can just get that foot hiked up like that, and that's gonna give you that clearance out of there. So depending on how you're comfortable with, if you like getting that foot out there and get a little more weight on it, that's totally fine. If you wanna just pack that foot up high, that's good too. Or if you wanna go to that road race posture, that's totally fine. The only caveat to the road racing posture, this is where I really struggle with, is as soon as I get onto the dirt, I've got to switch gears in my head and tell myself I'm back into the dirt. So I can't road race posture there. I've actually got to use more of a standard dirt riding posture where I'm leaning the bike in and trying to stay upright as possible. So that can be kind of the trick on that. You do have to flip a pretty quick switch in your head if that's what you're kind of used to. All right, well, let's talk about the reasons we actually want to keep the bike more upright in the dirt versus leaning it in like road race style. So typically when we're in the dirt, things are a little looser and slippier and slidier out there. So what's going to happen is as soon as you try to dive that bike in and you're leaning in with it as well, you're taking all that weight and just crumbling it down. So you've actually got to have a little bit of stability in the dirt to where you're sitting more up straight and you can lean that bike in. And then you're going to run into situations where if the back end starts sliding out, that's going to be a little more controlled. When we get back onto the asphalt, it's a lot harder to do the traditional backing the bike in on a supermoto bike when you're leaning it in, because then all that bike is just wanting to sway out from underneath you. If you're actually sitting more up on the bike and using more of that counterweighting process, you can actually feather the rear brake a little bit as you're coming into the turn, working the front brake as well. But that, if the back end starts coming out, you're gonna feel a lot more controlled sitting more upright on the bike versus leaning way down if it were like a right-hand turn coming into it and trying to back that bike in. I guarantee if you try a road racing posture while you're trying to back in the bike in, 9 times out of 10, if you're not a MotoGP rider and you're not getting a $30 million contract, you're probably going to low-side yourself every time. So something to consider out there. There's a lot of great videos out there to watch. I think Josh Yates, he's a phenomenal rider out there. Maybe check out some of his videos. He's got some really good examples of it. But yeah, just keeping the bike more up, trying to keep the bike more upright in the dirt versus leaning it in, and as well as your posture. So keeping more upright, leaning the bike in versus you, that's going to feel a lot more stable on the bike in the dirt versus just trying to lean into where that's just going to end up in a disaster every time. So give that a shot. If you're more used to road racing posture, maybe work on doing kind of more of that slower counterweighting process, and that might feel a little more stable in the dirt for you too as well. All right, gang, we're also going to talk about a little bit about what the bike is actually doing when it does start to move out from underneath you. So this is actually the brilliant thing about motorcycles. Once you can get the back end to slide and that front wheel cocks in that direction, once it's in this direction and pointing that way, that tire is tracking that way. It won't lose traction. The back end might slide out, but once that front wheel is cocked and you're drifting it and that wheel is pointing in that direction, it's already in a path of travel wanting to go that direction. It's not going to slip out from you. Same thing if we're going in the opposite direction. If we're got the bike kicked, the front end cocks in this direction, we're letting the back end slide a little bit. Once that front end cocks, you can feel pretty confident that it's not going to take off out from underneath you. It's going to be the back end that's going to move around on you a little bit. So those are some processes that I really work with. The other thing is strong head turns and keeping that chin up. As soon as you get that head dipping down, that's where you're telling the bike to go, is right down towards the ground. So even as you're coming through those turns, keeping that chin up, getting that exit planned out, already ahead of the situation. Okay? Big mistake I see with a lot of riders out there is they let their arms sag when they're out on the bike. So you're in attack mode, so you want those elbows up and ready to pounce in that situation. That way when you lean that bike in, that elbow should almost be up to your top of your head as you're leaning it in. If your arms start sagging down, you're not really in that attack mode, you don't have that room to really get that bike maneuver around, you're kind of locked in to this kind of position as well, okay? Now we're gonna talk about wrist position a little bit. Wrist position is pretty crucial as well. A lot of people are kind of used to this standard riding position where they just have their hands in this position the whole time. Well, when we're getting into those more aggressive situations where we're really trying to get that bike cranked down, we've actually have to adjust our wrist position. So instead of keeping that typical wrist position, your inside wrist, you're actually gonna turn into a screwdriver. So as you're leaning it in, you're gonna move that wrist about 30 degrees to where you're actually holding that grip like that. That's gonna allow you to get that elbow pointed out, get that chin in that direction, okay? If your wrist is like this, then you're kind of locked up in your rib cage. And this is applicable with road racing too, okay? When you go to the opposite side, same thing. You turn that throttle into a screwdriver, get that elbow pointed out, keep that chin up, okay? So now we've kind of talked about hands and elbows, keeping those elbows up. The other thing I would recommend is keeping the knees into the bike. This is gonna be your anchor to the bike. Baby birds in your hands. We're not bolted down to the grips with these because then we don't have any of that finesse in our handling. So this is gonna be the anchor to our bike. These are the biggest muscles. They'll last you all day long. Our little paws get tired if we're just clamped on those with that death grip on there. So remember those knees. If you're leaning your bike in, you can use that outer leg to anchor yourself in. And if the bike wasn't going to tip over in the stand, I can actually lean this way without falling off the bike. Same thing with this way, using that knee to anchor in. That way I can lean in and keep up on the bike instead of having to really anchor down on my grips and really stiffening things up. So hopefully that helps out a little bit. So remember, head and eyes up, strong head turns, keep those elbows up, screwdrivers in your paws. And like I said, it's only the inside grip you have to turn into a screwdriver, not both hand grips like that. So just let your outer one just relax. If you're on a sport bike, you'll actually be leaning over and that elbow should almost be touching your gas cap on your tank. If you switch over, it's just gonna be opposite like that. Okay, so hopefully that helps out, gang. Remember, toes into the bike, that'll help out as well, keeping you anchored in. And hopefully when the season warms up, you can start applying this stuff. So we'll see you next time, gang. We'll see you out there as well. Thanks, bye.